The town of Black Hollow had always been shrouded in mystery. Nestled deep in a valley, it was cut off from the rest of the world by dense forests and jagged cliffs. The people who lived there spoke in whispers about the Watcher. Everyone knew the stories, how, late at night, a figure with hollow eyes would appear just outside the window of unsuspecting homes. No one knew who or what it was. They said the Watcher never moved. It didn't knock, didn't speak. It only stared. And if you locked eyes with it, you'd never be seen again. One brisk autumn evening, a young journalist named Elena arrived in Black Hollow. She was drawn to the eerie tales, hoping to turn them into a piece that would launch her career. Elena wasn't the kind to believe in ghost stories. She thrived on facts, logic, and uncovering the truth. Her first stop was the local inn, a worn-down building with creaking floors and an owner who seemed reluctant to meet her gaze. "You'll hear about the Watcher, aren't you?" the innkeeper asked, as she handed Elena a key to her room. "I am," Elena replied, her voice steady. "Do you know anything about it?" The innkeeper hesitated, her hand trembling as she wiped the counter. "Best advice I can give you is to keep your curtains drawn at night. Don't look outside, no matter what you hear." Elena smiled politely, brushing off the warning as part of the town's superstitions. She went up to her room, unpacked her equipment, and began jotting down notes about the stories she'd heard so far. As the sun set, the town fell eerily silent. No distant hum of cars, no chatter from pedestrians. Just silence, broken only by the occasional groan of the old inn settling into the night. Around midnight, Eleanor's curiosity got the better of her. She grabbed her recorder and decided to take a walk through the streets of Black Hollow. The town was completely deserted, every window dark. She passed homes with curtains tightly drawn, doors locked, and no sign of life. Then she felt it, the distinct sensation of being watched. Eleanor froze, her breath catching in her throat. She turned slowly, scanning the empty street. At first, she saw nothing, but then, in the distance, near the edge of the woods, she spotted a figure. It stood motionless, its form shrouded in darkness. Her logical mind tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was a scarecrow, she thought, left out by some local to add to the town's eerie charm. But the longer she stared, the more uneasy she felt. The figure wasn't just standing there, it was facing her. Shaking off the unease, Elena snapped a photo with her camera and continued walking. She refused to be rattled by a shadow in the night. But as she turned a corner, there it was again. The figure stood at the far end of the street, closer now. Her heart began to race. This time, she could make out more details. Its outline was human-like, but wrong, too thin, too tall. And those eyes, they were empty, like two black pits. Elena's instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run to the safety of the inn, but her journalist's determination pushed her forward. She raised her camera again, zooming in. The flash illuminated the figure briefly, but when she lowered the camera, it was gone. Her hands trembled as she checked the photo. It showed nothing but an empty street. Confused and unnerved, Elena hurried back to the inn. She locked the door to her room and closed the curtains, just as the innkeeper had advised. But sleep wouldn't come. She sat in bed, staring at the photo on her camera, trying to rationalize what she'd seen. Then she heard it, a soft tap on the window. Her blood turned to ice. She told herself it was just a branch swaying in the wind, but the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. She glanced at the window, the curtains blocking her view of whatever was outside. "Don't look," she whispered to herself. "Don't look." The tapping stopped. Silence filled the room again, but it was heavier this time, pressing down on her chest. And then she heard something else, a faint whisper. It was coming from outside, so quiet she could barely make out the words. Elena. Her name. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she tried to stay calm. It's not real, she thought. It can't be real. But the whispering grew louder, more insistent. Elena, look outside. Her hands clenched the edge of the blanket, knuckles white. The voice was hypnotic, pulling at her curiosity like a magnet. Finally, she couldn't resist. With trembling hands, she reached for the curtain. Slowly, she pulled it back an inch, just enough to peek outside. Her heart stopped. The watcher was there, inches from the glass. Its face was pale and featureless, except for those black, empty eyes. They bore into hers, and she couldn't look away. Suddenly, the room felt suffocating, the air thick and cold. Eleanor tried to move, to scream, but her body wouldn't obey. The watcher raised a hand, its long, spindly fingers tapping against the glass. And then, it smiled. The smile was grotesque, stretching too wide, too far. The last thing Elena saw was the glass shattering, and the watcher reaching for her. When the innkeeper went to check on Elena the next morning, the room was empty. Her belongings were still there, the bed unmade, but there was no sign of her. The only clue was the camera, left on the nightstand. The last photo it captured showed the interior of the room, empty, except for a faint shadow in the corner. And in Black Hollow, the story of the Watcher continues, with one more name added to the whispers.